Ladies and gentlemen, today I want to talk about something that is both deeply challenging and incredibly transformative. The power of forcing yourself to be consistent. We often think consistency is about being flawless, about doing everything perfectly every single day. But the truth is, consistency has very little to do with perfection, and everything to do with showing up, even when you don't feel like it, even when the world tells you to give up, even when the voice in your head whispers, "Not today." Or to force yourself to be consistent doesn't mean becoming rigid or robotic. It means understanding that growth requires effort, commitment, and courage. It's easy to stay comfortable. It's easy to hit the snooze button, skip the workout, put off the project, or convince yourself that tomorrow will be better. But consistency isn't built in the safety of tomorrow. It is built today, in the uncomfortable moments when you are tired, distracted, discouraged, or doubting yourself, and yet you choose to act anyway. Self-discipline is not punishment. It is a gift you give yourself. It's the courage to choose long-term fulfillment over short-term relief. Think about it. Every time you push yourself to keep going, you are not only building a habit, you are strengthening your character. You are training your mind to trust that when you set an intention, you will follow through. That trust in yourself is priceless. Without it, we become trapped in cycles of broken promises, where we say we'll start tomorrow, and tomorrow never comes. Consistency is not about grand gestures. It's about the small, repeated actions that compound into remarkable results. Writing 1 page a day may not seem like much, but in a year, it's a book. Saving a small amount of money each week may not seem powerful, but in time, it creates security. Speaking kindly to yourself each morning may feel insignificant, but over months, it transforms the way you see your worth. These little moments are the bricks that build the foundation of trust, resilience, and growth. The hardest part of consistency is not the action itself. It's how we handle the moments when we fall short, when we miss a day, when we skip the workout, when we don't keep the promise we made to ourselves. Shame steps in. We tell ourselves we're weak, lazy, or incapable. But shame is the enemy of consistency. Shame convinces us that because we slipped, we should stop. But consistency is not about never falling. It's about standing up every time we fall, dusting ourselves off, and saying, "I am still in this. I am still capable. I will begin again." Forcing yourself to be consistent means honoring your commitments to yourself with the same respect and devotion you give to others. Think about it. If you promised a loved one you would be there for them, you wouldn't back out simply because you felt tired or uninspired. You would show up. So why not treat your own promises with that same sacredness? When you tell yourself you will do something, keep it. Because every time you honor your own word, you are telling yourself, "I matter, my goals matter, my growth matters." In the end, consistency is not about force in the sense of harshness or cruelty. It's about force in the sense of power, determination, and resolve. It is the force that pushes through resistance, the force that breaks through doubt, the force that carries you from where you are to where you want to be. You don't have to be perfect to be consistent. You just have to be willing to show up again and again with courage, with commitment, and with compassion for yourself. So, I leave you with this. Do not wait for motivation. Do not wait for the perfect moment. Force yourself to be consistent. Because the life you want, the person you dream of becoming, and the future you deserve are all waiting on the other side of your consistent choices today. Consistency is not about perfection, and the sooner we understand this, the freer we become to actually pursue the goals and dreams that matter most to us. Perfection is a trap, a prison that convinces us that, unless we can do something flawlessly, we shouldn't do it at all. But life doesn't work that way. Human beings are not built to be flawless, and expecting perfection is the quickest way to burn out, give up, or never even start. What consistency truly requires is the courage to show up day after day, even when we don't feel like it. That's where the real magic happens, not in perfect execution, but in imperfect persistence. Think about how often we wait for the perfect conditions before starting something important. We wait for the right time, the right mood, the right energy, the right resources. But waiting for perfection delays action indefinitely, because those perfect conditions rarely ever come. The person who grows is not the one who waits for inspiration, but the one who shows up even in the absence of it. Showing up tired, showing up unsure, showing up unmotivated, and still doing the work. That is where character is formed and progress is made. The truth is, nobody feels motivated every single day. Motivation is fleeting, unreliable, and often exaggerated. What keeps people going is not endless motivation, but the habit of showing up regardless of how they feel. When you force yourself to show up despite the resistance inside, you are rewriting the script of your life. You are teaching your mind and body that discomfort is not a reason to stop, that imperfection is not a reason to give up. And in those moments when you feel like you're giving the bare minimum, when you think your effort is too small to matter, you are actually building the resilience that will carry you through future challenges. Because success is not built in bursts of perfection. It is built in the quiet, ordinary, consistent steps that nobody claps for, nobody praises, but which compound over time into extraordinary outcomes. Imagine a musician learning to play an instrument. If they waited for perfect practice conditions every single day, they would never master their craft. Some days their hands are tired. Some days they feel uninspired. Some days the music doesn't flow. But the act of sitting down and practicing anyway is what develops their skill. Similarly, a writer who only writes when inspiration strikes will never finish their book. But the one who sits down and writes even on the days the words feel clumsy will eventually craft a masterpiece. These examples remind us that consistency is not glamorous. It often feels boring, repetitive, and even frustrating. But it is in that grind, in those ordinary acts of showing up, that excellence is forged. Perfection whispers lies to us. It says, if you can't do it flawlessly, don't do it at all. Consistency tells us the truth, even small, imperfect actions matter when repeated over time. Too many dreams have died not because people weren't capable, but because they were convinced their imperfect effort wasn't enough. They thought if they couldn't run 5 miles, 1 mile didn't matter. If they couldn't meditate for 30 minutes, 5 minutes wasn't worth it. If they couldn't save a large amount of money, a small amount was pointless. But in reality, it is the small, repeated efforts, the mile, the 5 minutes, the few saved coins, that lay the foundation for bigger breakthroughs. Showing up even when you don't feel like it also strengthens trust in yourself. Every time you act despite resistance, you're sending yourself a powerful message. I can rely on me. This is one of the most overlooked benefits of consistency. Most of us crave trust from others, but forget the importance of trusting ourselves. When we keep breaking promises to ourselves, skipping the workout, delaying the project, avoiding the hard conversation, we quietly erode our self-respect. On the other hand, when we show up and follow through, even if imperfectly, we begin to rebuild that trust. And over time, that trust becomes unshakable confidence because you know deep down that you can depend on yourself. Now let's talk about the days you truly don't feel like it. We all have them. Days when the alarm feels heavier than usual, when your energy is gone before you even start, when your heart isn't in the work. On those days, perfection says, skip it. You won't do it well anyway. But consistency says, show up. Even if it's messy, because what matters is not the quality of every single action, but the accumulation of actions over time. Even a small effort keeps the momentum alive. It's like keeping a fire burning. You don't always need to throw on a big log. Sometimes a handful of kindling is enough to keep the flame alive until tomorrow. Consistency also teaches us humility. When we give up the idea of being perfect, we learn to embrace the process. We accept that growth is messy, progress is uneven, and setbacks are inevitable. This humility frees us from the unrealistic pressure of flawless performance, and instead allows us to focus on what we can control. Showing up and giving our best for that day, whatever that best may look like. Some days it's extraordinary, some days it's average, and some days it feels like barely scraping by. But all of it counts, because all of it keeps you moving forward. It is also important to remember that showing up when you don't feel like it creates discipline, and discipline eventually creates freedom. At first, it feels like a burden to force yourself to do the thing when you'd rather avoid it. But over time, those small choices compound into skills, habits, and achievements that open doors to new opportunities. The writer who forces themselves to write eventually has the freedom of a completed book. The athlete who forces themselves to train eventually has the freedom of physical strength and health. The student who forces themselves to study eventually has the freedom of knowledge and options. What feels like force in the moment becomes freedom in the future. So, consistency is not about being flawless. It is about persistence. It is about showing up tired, showing up unprepared, showing up uninspired, but showing up anyway. It is about valuing progress over perfection, momentum over stagnation, resilience over excuses. It is about honoring the truth that small, consistent actions, no matter how imperfect, are infinitely more powerful than waiting for the perfect moment that never comes. The path to your dreams, your goals, and your growth will not be paved with perfect steps. It will be paved with imperfect ones, taken again and again with determination and courage. So the next time you feel like skipping the thing you know matters, remember this: you don't need to be perfect, you just need to show up. And if you keep showing up, day after day, you will look back one day and realize that what once felt small and insignificant built the very life you dreamed of living. That is the quiet, powerful force of consistency. Self-discipline requires courage, and it is often misunderstood as something rigid, cold, or joyless. Many people hear the word discipline and imagine restriction, punishment, or the absence of fun. But in reality, discipline is one of the most liberating forces in life, because it allows you to build the kind of future you want instead of being enslaved by impulses, distractions, and fleeting pleasures. The reason discipline requires courage is because it demands that you look beyond the immediate gratification of the present moment and commit yourself to something greater, something lasting, something that will not give you comfort right away, but will bring transformation over time. It takes courage to say no to what feels good now, in order to say yes to what will feel meaningful later. Every single day we are confronted with choices between short-term comfort and long-term growth. Comfort whispers to us in subtle ways. It says, sleep a little longer, skip the workout, eat the junk food, delay the project, avoid the difficult conversation, scroll a little more, binge a little longer. These choices feel good in the moment. They soothe us, they distract us, they provide relief. But growth requires a different kind of choice, a choice that often feels uncomfortable, a choice that requires us to sacrifice ease for effort. Growth says, wake up and move your body, eat what nourishes you, work on your craft, speak the truth, face the task you're avoiding. These choices rarely feel good in the moment, but they are investments in the future you want. The courage of discipline is found in those moments when you are tempted by the easy road, but choose the harder one because you know it leads somewhere better. It is not easy to live this way because human nature is wired for comfort. Our brains are designed to conserve energy, to seek pleasure, and to avoid pain. So when you practice self-discipline, you are not only going against external temptations, you are going against your own biology, your own instincts, the part of you that craves the immediate reward. That's why discipline requires courage. You are literally fighting against the current of your own impulses. It takes bravery to delay gratification, to sit with discomfort, to resist the quick fix in favor of the slow and steady path. And every time you choose long-term growth over short-term comfort, you are proving to yourself that you are stronger than your impulses, that you are not a prisoner of your cravings, that you are capable of living intentionally rather than reactively. Discipline is often invisible to the outside world. People see the results, the athlete's performance, the entrepreneur's success, the artist's masterpiece, the student's achievements. But what they don't see are the countless small acts of courage behind the scenes. They don't see the nights someone stayed in to study when others went out, the mornings they woke up early when nobody was watching, the temptations they resisted, the excuses they silenced. Discipline is private long before it is public. It is the courageous decision you make in silence, without applause, without recognition, when it would be easier to choose comfort. And over time, those unseen choices shape not only your achievements, but your character. Courage and discipline are inseparable because there is always fear in the background. Fear of missing out when you choose not to indulge. Fear of failure when you commit to something difficult. Fear of judgment when you pursue an unconventional path. Fear of discomfort when you push yourself into unfamiliar territory. Without courage, discipline crumbles under the weight of those fears. But when courage steps in, discipline becomes a shield that protects your values, your goals, and your vision for the future. With courage, you can look fear in the eye and say, "Yes, I'm afraid. Yes, this is hard. Yes, this is uncomfortable. But I will choose it anyway because I know it is right for me." One of the great paradoxes of discipline is that it feels restrictive in the short term, but creates freedom in the long term. Think about your health. It takes courage to say no to certain foods, to move your body when you're tired, to rest when you'd rather push yourself. But that discipline builds the freedom of strength, energy, and longevity. Think about your finances. It takes courage to resist the urge to spend, to live within your means, to save and invest consistently. But that discipline creates the freedom of security, stability, and opportunity. Think about your craft. It takes courage to sit down every day and practice, to work when you're uninspired, to push past creative blocks. But that discipline eventually brings the freedom of mastery and expression. At first, discipline feels like sacrifice. Later, it feels like empowerment. What makes discipline even more courageous is that it rarely provides immediate results. You can go to the gym for a week and see no change in the mirror. You can save money for a month and still feel broke. You can write every day for weeks and still feel like your work is clumsy. And this is where most people quit, because comfort gives them something now, while discipline gives them something later. But if you stay the course, if you choose growth over comfort long enough, the results will come. They may not come quickly, but they will come steadily. And when they do, you will know they came because you had the courage to endure when others gave up. Discipline is also a form of self-respect. Every time you choose long-term growth, you are telling yourself that your future is worth fighting for, that your goals are worth the effort, that your life is worth living intentionally. Comfort can be seductive, but too much comfort often leads to regret. Regret is what happens when you realize you traded your potential for ease, your dreams for distractions, your growth for temporary relief. Courageous discipline prevents regret because it ensures that when you look back, you can say, "I gave my best. I chose what mattered. I honored myself enough to endure the hard things." It's important to remember that courage in discipline doesn't mean you never stumble. It doesn't mean you always make the right choice. It doesn't mean you are unshakable. Courage simply means that when you stumble, you stand back up. When you slip into comfort, you return to growth. When you break your own rule, you forgive yourself and recommit. The courage of discipline is not about being flawless. It's about being relentless. It's about refusing to let short-term comfort steal your long-term vision. So when you hear the word discipline, don't think of punishment. Think of courage. Think of the quiet strength it takes to say no to what feels easy and yes to what feels meaningful. Think of the bravery it takes to build habits that serve your future self. Think of the power it gives you to rise above your impulses and live according to your values. Discipline is not a prison. It is the courage to create freedom. Discipline is not a chain. It is the courage to cut through the chains of comfort that hold you back. Discipline is not about deprivation. It is about devotion to your growth, your potential, and your purpose. When you force yourself to practice discipline, you are not denying yourself joy. You are choosing a deeper joy, one that comes not from fleeting comfort, but from lasting fulfillment. And though it may feel hard, heavy, or lonely in the moment, the courage of discipline will reward you with a life that is stronger, freer, and richer than anything short-term comfort could ever offer. It is easy to underestimate the power of small, repeated actions because they often seem too simple, too ordinary, too insignificant to matter. We live in a culture obsessed with dramatic transformations, overnight success, and quick results, so we are conditioned to believe that only big, bold moves can change our lives. But the truth is, real transformation is rarely dramatic, it is subtle. It doesn't happen in a single day or a single action. It happens quietly, almost invisibly, through small, repeated actions that build trust in yourself and create unstoppable momentum over time. The world may not notice these actions at first, but you do, and that is what matters most. Trust in yourself is one of the most valuable assets you can ever develop. Without it, you hesitate, you doubt, you abandon your goals before they can bear fruit. But trust is not built by setting huge goals and achieving them overnight. Trust is built by making small promises to yourself and keeping them consistently. For example, when you tell yourself you'll drink more water each day and you follow through, you start to believe in your own word. When you decide you'll walk for 10 minutes a day and you keep showing up, you are proving to yourself that you are reliable. It's not about the size of the action, it's about the repetition. Each time you do what you said you would do, even on a small scale, you strengthen the bond between who you are and who you want to become. That bond is the foundation of self-trust. The problem is that many people dismiss these small actions because they don't deliver instant results. They think, what difference does 5 minutes of reading make? What difference does one push-up make? What difference does saving a single dollar make? And so they abandon the small steps because they don't look powerful enough on their own. But what they fail to see is that small actions, when repeated, don't just add up. They multiply. They compound like interest in a bank account, creating results far greater than the effort seemed to warrant. The writer who writes 200 words a day may feel insignificant at first, but in a year, that's 73,000 words. A novel. The person who saves just a little each day may not notice the impact in a week, but over time, that habit creates financial freedom. The individual who chooses to practice gratitude each morning for 2 minutes may not feel much at first, but in a few months, their entire outlook on life begins to shift. That's the hidden power of consistency in small actions. It compounds quietly until the results become undeniable. Small actions also build momentum, and momentum is what carries you forward when motivation fades. Think about pushing a heavy boulder. At first, it feels impossible. You strain, you sweat, and the rock barely moves. But if you keep pushing inch by inch, it starts to roll. And once it's rolling, momentum takes over, and it becomes easier to keep it going. The same is true with your habits and goals. Starting is hard. The first days of a new routine always feel like a battle. But each time you show up, even for a few minutes, you are pushing that boulder. Eventually, the effort begins to pay off, the resistance lessens, and momentum takes over. Suddenly, what once felt difficult begins to feel natural, even automatic. That is the reward of small, repeated actions. They carry you to a place where consistency no longer feels like a struggle but like second nature. It's also worth noting that small, repeated actions reshape your identity. Every action you take casts a vote for the kind of person you believe yourself to be. If you read a page of a book, you are casting a vote for being a reader. If you go for a short walk, you are casting a vote for being a healthy person. If you practice gratitude, you are casting a vote for being someone who is mindful and appreciative. One vote alone doesn't determine your identity, but the accumulation of votes does. Over time, the identity becomes stronger, and once your identity shifts, your actions follow naturally. You don't just do the things, you become the kind of person who does those things. And that identity creates an unshakable momentum, because it's no longer about forcing yourself. It's about living in alignment with who you are. Another powerful aspect of small actions is that they help overcome resistance. When a goal feels too large, it becomes paralyzing. You look at the mountain in front of you and feel too small to climb it. But if you break it down into tiny, manageable steps, it becomes less intimidating. You may not be able to climb the mountain today, but you can take a step, and then another, and then another. Each small action chips away at the resistance, proving to you that progress is possible, no matter how slow. This approach not only makes goals more achievable, but also reduces the fear of failure, because the stakes of each small action feel manageable. Trusting yourself through small actions also creates resilience. Life is unpredictable, and setbacks are inevitable. If your definition of success relies only on big wins, you will feel crushed when things go wrong. But if you've built a foundation of small, repeated actions, you have something to fall back on. Even on the hardest days, you can still do something small, and that keeps you connected to your goals. That's resilience. The ability to bend without breaking, to keep moving even when the path is rough. Small actions may not solve every problem, but they prevent you from giving up entirely. And that is what keeps momentum alive through life's challenges. It's important to understand that momentum is not just about speed. It's about direction. Small, repeated actions guide your energy and focus in a specific direction. If your actions are aligned with your values and goals, the momentum you build carries you closer to your vision. But the opposite is also true. Small negative actions, skipping responsibilities, indulging bad habits, neglecting growth, also build momentum, but in the wrong direction. That's why awareness is critical. The small choices you make each day are not neutral. They are nudging you closer to or further away from the life you want. And while you may not notice the difference day by day, in the long run, the trajectory becomes obvious. Ultimately, the trust and momentum created by small, repeated actions give you something priceless: belief in yourself. Belief that you are capable of following through. Belief that you are capable of growth. Belief that you are capable of becoming who you dream of being. That belief is what sustains you in the absence of external validation, applause, or immediate results. It keeps you grounded in the truth that progress is happening, even if it's not visible yet. And once you truly believe in yourself, you become unstoppable. Because there is no force more powerful than the conviction that you can and will follow through on your commitments. So never underestimate the impact of small, repeated actions. They may look insignificant to others and even to you at times, but they are quietly shaping your future. Each small step is a brick, and brick by brick, you are building the foundation of trust, resilience, and momentum. One day, you will look back and realize that the extraordinary was created not by a single grand gesture, but by the accumulation of small, consistent choices. And when that day comes, you will know that you can trust yourself completely, because you proved it through your actions, day after day, moment after moment. That is the unshakable momentum that turns dreams into reality. The greatest obstacle to consistency is not failure itself, but the shame and self-criticism that come when we fall short. Failure on its own is not final. It is simply feedback, a redirection, a signal that something didn't work. If we could see failure for what it really is, just information, we would be able to keep moving forward without much disruption. But what happens to most of us is that failure does not come alone. It comes with a chorus of inner voices telling us we are not enough, that we are weak, that we are incapable, that we will never change. This shame is heavier than the failure itself, and it is what convinces us to stop trying. Consistency dies not because of the fall, but because of the story we tell ourselves about the fall. Think about it, everyone fails at being consistent. Everyone skips a workout, misses a deadline, breaks a promise to themselves, or falls back into old habits. These slips are not unique to you. They are a universal part of being human. Yet when they happen, we often respond as if they are proof of our inadequacy. We don't just say, "I missed a day." We say, "I'm lazy. I'll never get it right. I'm not disciplined enough." That narrative is far more damaging than the missed action itself. Missing one day of practice, eating one unhealthy meal, or skipping one habit will not destroy your progress. But shaming yourself for it, criticizing yourself harshly, and convincing yourself that the slip defines your worth, that is what destroys consistency. Shame is paralyzing because it convinces you that you are broken, not just your behavior. Failure says, "You didn't do the thing." Shame says, "You are a failure." Do you see the difference? One is about the action, the other is about your identity. When you confuse your mistakes with who you are, you build walls around your growth. Instead of dusting yourself off and trying again, you collapse under the weight of self-judgment. And the tragic part is that this cycle keeps people stuck for years. They try, they stumble, they feel shame, they give up, and then they repeat the process, never realizing that the obstacle wasn't the stumble itself, but the shame attached to it. If you want to be consistent, you have to learn to separate failure from shame. You have to be able to say, "I made a mistake, but I am not a mistake." You have to be willing to treat yourself with the same compassion you would offer to someone you love. If your friend missed a day at the gym, you wouldn't say, "You're worthless, you'll never change." You would say, "It's okay. Tomorrow is a new day. Get back at it." Yet we often deny ourselves that same kindness. We reserve compassion for others and condemnation for ourselves. And until we change that, consistency will always feel like an impossible climb, not because the actions are too hard, but because the shame is too heavy. Self-criticism masquerades as motivation, but it rarely works. People think that beating themselves up will push them to do better. But in reality, it only drains them of energy and hope. Harsh self-talk might spark short bursts of effort, but it cannot sustain long-term consistency. Why? Because consistency requires endurance, and endurance cannot survive in a toxic environment. If every slip is met with self-punishment, you will eventually burn out and quit. But if every slip is met with forgiveness and recommitment, you can endure, you can adapt, and you can keep going. Forgiveness is not about excusing laziness. It is about giving yourself permission to continue without carrying the unnecessary burden of shame. Think of the difference between a child learning to walk and an adult trying to build a new habit. When a child falls, we cheer them on. We clap. We encourage, we say, "Get up, try again." We never scold them for falling because we know falling is part of the process. But when we, as adults, try to build consistency, we fall and then shame ourselves mercilessly. Imagine how much progress a child would make if every fall was met with criticism instead of encouragement. They would stop trying altogether. That's what many of us do to ourselves without realizing it. The fall is not the problem. It's how we treat ourselves after the fall that determines whether we get up again. One of the most powerful truths about consistency is that you don't need to be perfect to succeed. Missing one day doesn't erase all the days you showed up. Skipping one action doesn't mean your efforts are wasted. Progress is not fragile. It can withstand imperfections. In fact, it's built with imperfections. The person who succeeds is not the one who never stumbles, but the one who stumbles and still chooses to return again and again. That choice requires compassion. It requires the ability to silence the inner critic and replace it with a voice that says, "This is not the end. I am capable of beginning again." When you let go of shame, you give yourself the freedom to focus on growth instead of punishment. You shift from asking, "Why am I so weak?" to asking, "What can I learn from this slip?" That mindset turns failure into a teacher instead of a tormentor. Maybe you learn that your schedule needs adjusting. Maybe you learn that you need accountability. Maybe you learn that you were too rigid and need more flexibility. These lessons are valuable, but you can only receive them if you are willing to let go of shame and see failure as part of the process rather than proof of inadequacy. It also helps to recognize that shame thrives in secrecy and silence. When you keep your struggles hidden, they grow heavier. But when you speak them out, when you share them with someone safe, shame loses its power. Saying out loud, "I slipped, but I want to try again," is an act of courage that dismantles shame's grip. It reminds you that you are human, and being human means being imperfect, and yet imperfection does not disqualify you from growth. In fact, it is the very soil in which growth happens. If you want unshakable consistency, you must build a relationship with yourself that is rooted in compassion, not criticism. You must learn to treat setbacks as stepping stones instead of stumbling blocks. You must accept that failure is part of the journey and refuse to let shame define you. Every single person who has achieved anything remarkable has failed countless times along the way. The difference is that they didn't let shame silence them. They didn't let self-criticism stop them from trying again. They understood that consistency is not about never falling, but about always getting back up. So the next time you stumble, remind yourself, the real danger is not the missed action, but the shame that follows. Refuse to wear shame as your identity. Refuse to speak to yourself with cruelty. Instead, choose compassion, choose forgiveness, choose recommitment. Failure is just a part of progress, but shame is the thief that steals progress entirely. If you can break free from shame, if you can silence the self-criticism and replace it with encouragement, you will unlock a consistency that nothing can shake. Because at the end of the day, consistency is not about being flawless. It is about being resilient. And resilience is born not in perfection, but in the courage to rise after every fall without dragging shame along with you. Forcing yourself to be consistent is not about harshness, punishment, or rigid control. At its core, it is about respect, specifically the respect you give to yourself. We live in a world where people bend over backwards to honor commitments to others, to keep promises to family, to meet deadlines at work, to show up when a friend needs them. Yet when it comes to the promises we make to ourselves, we often treat them as optional, as if our own word carries less weight than everyone else's. We convince ourselves that breaking our commitments to ourselves is harmless because nobody else sees it, nobody else notices, nobody else will be disappointed. But the truth is, someone does notice, you notice. Every broken commitment to yourself erodes your trust in yourself. And every honored commitment, no matter how small, builds strength, confidence, and consistency that cannot be taken away. Think about the double standard many of us live with. If you promised a friend you would meet them at a certain time, you wouldn't simply skip it because you felt tired. If your boss asked you to finish a task, you wouldn't blow it off because you didn't feel like working that day. If your family depended on you to show up, you would show up. Yet when you make a commitment to wake up early, to exercise, to write, to learn, or to build a habit, it's so easy to dismiss it with the excuse, "I'll start tomorrow." This is not because you don't care about your growth. It's because you haven't yet given your own word the same sacredness you give to others. Forcing yourself to be consistent means deciding once and for all that your word to yourself matters just as much, if not more, than the word you give anyone else. The way we treat our commitments to ourselves reveals how much we value our own lives. When we keep breaking promises to ourselves, what we are really saying is, my growth isn't important. My dreams don't matter. My future is negotiable. That attitude slowly destroys self-respect. On the other hand, when we force ourselves to follow through, even when it's uncomfortable, we send ourselves the opposite message. I am worth showing up for. My goals are worth my effort. My life deserves the same loyalty I give to others. That message becomes the foundation of confidence. Because confidence isn't built by telling yourself you can do something. It's built by proving it through action. Consistency, then, is not about superhuman willpower. It's about integrity. Integrity is not only about how you treat others, it's also about how you treat yourself. If you want to feel powerful, if you want to feel grounded, if you want to feel trustworthy, you must start by honoring your own word. That's why forcing yourself to be consistent is so transformative. It shifts your identity. You stop being the person who makes promises and breaks them, and you become the person who makes promises and keeps them. That shift doesn't just impact your habits, it impacts the way you walk, the way you speak, the way you carry yourself. You begin to radiate trust, not just outwardly but inwardly, because you know you can depend on you. Many people mistakenly believe that self-respect comes from external achievements. Earning a degree, getting a promotion, reaching a milestone. While those things can enhance confidence, the foundation of self-respect is much simpler. It's whether you keep your word to yourself. You could have all the external success in the world, but if you constantly break promises to yourself, you will always feel insecure inside. Conversely, even if your progress looks small on the outside, if you consistently honor your commitments to yourself, you will feel unstoppable. That is why some of the most confident people are not the ones with the loudest achievements, but the ones who know deep down, when I say I'll do something, I will. Of course, forcing yourself to be consistent is not easy. It means pushing through resistance, ignoring excuses and facing discomfort head-on. But here's the truth: every time you honor a commitment to yourself, it gets easier. The first time you drag yourself out of bed to follow through on a promise, it feels heavy. The second time, it's still hard, but you remember that you've done it before. The third time, it becomes a little lighter. And before long, it's no longer about force. It's about habit. What once required grit and determination becomes part of who you are. And that transformation is only possible because you decided to treat your own word with the same respect you give to everyone else's. When you don't honor your commitments to yourself, you create a cycle of self-doubt. You tell yourself, "I'll start tomorrow." But tomorrow comes and you don't start. You say, "This week I'll be disciplined." But by the end of the week, you've abandoned your plan. Over time, your brain learns not to believe your own words. And when you no longer believe yourself, you lose confidence. That's why so many people struggle with self-doubt. It's not because they're incapable, but because they've broken their own trust too many times. The way to rebuild that trust is not by making huge promises, but by making small ones and keeping them consistently. Start with commitments that feel achievable and force yourself to honor them no matter what. As you succeed, you'll begin to rebuild trust, and that trust will become the foundation of bigger commitments later. Think about the pride you feel when you keep a commitment to someone else. It feels good to know that people can count on you, that you're reliable, that you're trustworthy. Now imagine giving yourself that same gift. Imagine being able to look in the mirror and know that when you decide something, you will follow through. That feeling is powerful, and it is available to anyone willing to respect themselves enough to be consistent. The external world may never know how many small promises you've kept, but you will know, and that knowledge will give you a quiet strength that no one can take away. There's also a deeper dimension to this. Honoring your commitments to yourself is an act of self-love. We often think of self-love as being soft, gentle, forgiving, and it is, but it's also firm, disciplined, and demanding. True self-love says, I will not let myself settle for less than what I'm capable of. True self-love says, I will hold myself accountable because my future matters. True self-love says, I will force myself to be consistent, not because it's easy, but because I deserve the life that consistency will create. Forcing yourself to be consistent is not about cruelty. It is about devotion. It is about loving yourself enough to demand the best from yourself. At the end of the day, every act of consistency is a declaration. It says, I respect myself. I believe in myself. I trust myself. And every act of inconsistency is also a declaration, one that says, my word to myself doesn't matter. You get to decide every day which declaration you will live by. The difference between the life you dream of and the life you settle for is often hidden in that decision. Will you treat your own word as sacred? Will you force yourself to honor your commitments even when no one is watching? Will you give yourself the same respect you so easily give to others? If the answer is yes, you will discover a kind of power that no external validation can provide. You will discover that the key to confidence, success, and fulfillment is not outside of you. It is within you, in the simple act of keeping your word to yourself. Force yourself to be consistent, not because it is easy, but because it is the highest form of respect you can show yourself. And when you do, you will realize that you have always been capable, always been worthy, always been strong. You just needed to honor yourself the way you deserve.